Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Nau mai, haere mai, welcome to the 2024 University of Auckland Early Childhood Seminar Series, Seminar for November. We'll begin our time together with karakia. Me inoi tātou. Tū tawa mai I runga, tū tawa mai I raro, tū tawa mai I roto, tū tawa mai I waho. Kia tau ai te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te katoa. Haumi e, hui e, hai ki e. Thank you for joining us for today's presentation by Associate Professor Sue Cherrington and Dr. Ali Glasgow from Te Herenga Waka, Victoria University of Wellington. We are delighted to have Sue and Ali with us here to share findings from the current TLRI project focusing on how early childhood kaiako in Pacific and non-Pacific early childhood education settings can better support oral language development amongst children from Pacific heritages. If questions arise for you during the presentation that you would like to ask Sue and Ali, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen and they will respond to them at the end of their presentation. You can also use the chat function throughout the presentation to connect with each other and the panelists. After the seminar, a recording will be available on our Early Childhood Seminar Series YouTube channel. I will now pass over to Dr. Maria Cooper, Co-Associate Dean Pacific at the Faculty of Education and Social Work, to welcome and introduce Associate Professor Cherrington and Dr. Glasgow. Kia ora, Maria.
Thank you, Justine. Mauri ora kia koutou talofa lava, warm Pacific greetings, and in celebration of this week of the languages of Papua New Guinea, the most linguistically diverse nation in the world with over 800 languages, I say gutpla, avenue, and welcome. Good afternoon and welcome. I am delighted to introduce our guest speakers for today's presentation. Personally, I have known Sue and Ali for many years now and have always admired the work they do to support children, families and communities in ECE, as well as their own students and colleagues at Te Herenga Waka, Victoria University of Wellington. Dr. Sue Cherrington is the head of school and an associate professor in the School of Education with an extensive background in early childhood education as both a kindergarten teacher and educator since 1992. Her research primarily focuses on professional and pedagogical practices in early childhood education, focusing on pedagogical and professional practices which are brought together in her leadership of an amazing team of researchers in their current Teaching and Learning Research Initiative, or TLRI project, which focuses on supporting oral language acquisition for children from Pacific heritages. Sue's work significantly impacts the lives of young children by enhancing teaching practices and language development, and we are delighted to have you here, Sue. Dr. Ali Glasgow is senior researcher and senior lecturer with a strong foundation in early childhood education and in promoting the value of Pacific education through cultural and linguistic pedagogy. She is co-investigator in their TLRI project on oral language acquisition for children from Pacific heritages and has previously explored language and cultural practices in Pacific language nests in Aotearoa. Ali's research work spans early childhood to tertiary education, focusing on integrating Pacific values and community perspectives into educational practices, impacting infants, toddlers, young children, their families and communities, and ECE teachers. And together, Sue, Ali, and their team show a strong commitment to improving broad educational outcomes through culturally responsive research. And we are delighted to have the opportunity to hear about their project today. As Justine said, if you have any questions that come up for you during the presentation, just pop them in the Q&A box and I'll pick them up when I facilitate discussion after their presentation. So no mai, haere mai, awhio mai, welcome Sue and Ali.
Kia ora, Maria, thank you, and thank you, Justine, for your very, very warm welcomes for Ali and I. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou to people who are here, for Sue Cherrington Kakawingawa. We're really delighted to be part of this University of Auckland Early Childhood Seminar Series and to present with you today, and for me particularly delighted to be presenting with my co-researcher and dearest colleague Ali Glasgow. Also want to thank the TLRI Fund for supporting our project that we're going to be presenting on. This is our first presentation on this project so far, so it's a real delight to be in this forum to be doing so. So our project team comprises of colleagues at Te Herenga Waka. So along with Ali and I, we have Associate Professor Meli Tomopio, who is actually in the School of Psychology, and from the University of Waikato, Professor Claire McLaughlin, and from Massey University's Associate Professor Tara McLaughlin and Dr. Karen Aspden. And Ali has worked in the past with two of our partners, our early childhood partners, the EFKS Amanga Amata from Newtown and the Punanga Reo, whereas Tara and I have both worked with Moera and Waiwhetu kindergartens who are part of Hutt City kindergartens. We've done previous projects with Hutt City kindergartens. So we've got a team that has worked together. Some parts of us have worked together on previous projects, but we're bringing together in this new project for us. So as researchers, we're particularly interested in teacher kaioko practice and how we can support teachers to strengthen their practices, as Maria said in her introduction. And so in this project, we're particularly interested in how we support kaioko to strengthen their practice in relation to children's oral language acquisition and learning, and particularly in relation to Pacific children or children of Pacific heritages in terms of their oral language and learning, whether they be monolingualistic or multilingual children. Yes. So you can see that the three research questions that we have for this project, looking for how we can strengthen practice, how we might support teachers in whānau to draw on Pacific home languages, contexts and cultural experiences to support children's oral language learning, and then how might teachers inquire into their practices in order to strengthen what they're doing with young children. So we've drawn from this whakatauki from He Kōrerorero, which many of you would be familiar with, toko reo, toko oho, toko reo, toko mapihi, Moera, toko reo, toko whakakai, mahiri. My language is my awakening, my language is my treasure, my language is my prized possession. And we've borrowed that one from He Kōrerorero because of the importance of oral language acquisition for young children, and our belief that language is a tonga and it is far too precious for us to be leaving to chance as early childhood teachers in kaioko. And one of the theoretical frames that really underpins this project has been drawing on the Sililata's Fale Tele framework, which uses that metaphor of a double-hulled deep sea canoe in order to kind of demonstrate or illustrate how children's home languages, their literacies, their cultures and worldviews can be incorporated alongside the literacy, the language, the culture and the worldview of the educational setting. So recognising that many of our Pacific children and indeed many other children walk in two worlds, and that is possible for us to support them to do so successfully if we're using that kind of, drawing on the metaphor. We're also very aware that the Education Review Office, now 7 years ago, but was very clear about the improvements that were needed in many early childhood services in order to support oral language development. And so we hope that this project is going to help to provide insights into ways in which kaioko can be supported to do that and to strengthen their practice. So throughout the project, we've got a really strong focus on quality kaioko children and child interactions and ones that are really supporting oral language and development. And how we might be able to support and build our knowledge of how our early childhood teachers can support children's oral language development within this context of te whāriki and within the socio-cultural approaches to curriculum and assessment that te whāriki draws upon there. So within the project, we're pulling on the research of both our research team, but also very much on the expertise of our practitioners and their experiences in order to focus on how both Pacific and non-Pacific early childhood settings can better support the development of oral language for children of Pacific heritages. And as we'll unpack a little bit further as we go through, that's quite a complex piece of work in terms of working with 4 settings who are really have quite different philosophies and worldviews and contexts. So we're using a multiple case study design that many of you will be familiar with, and our unit of analysis both within and then across the 4 cases as focuses on teachers' practices and interactions and the impact of these on children's heritages, children's language experiences and acquisition. So for each of our services who we've partnered with, we are supporting them to undertake a number of teacher inquiries as collective teams, a number of cycles of those where they're each choosing a particular element of children's oral language development and teacher practice that they can be drawing on and working towards. So across our 4 services, we're going to end up with each taking a fairly individual path, but all underneath that umbrella of how can we support oral language development. Many of you will be very familiar with the teaching inquiry approach, the model there that we've got, so I won't go into that any further, and I'll pass over to Ellie now.
Me take mata, ko ele Glasgow tako ingoa. So thank you, Sue, for the introduction and sort of leading us into the research presentation. So I'm looking now at the Pacific values and methodologies that underpin the research as well, given that we are working with Pacific communities and really trying to entrench some of this, the values approach into our research approach. So from earlier research that I was involved with, we looked at the Pacific values with teachers out in the field from early childhood right through to tertiary, and we found that Pacific teachers were more strong in terms of values and Pacific values. They were far more strongly felt and enacted in their teaching practice than non-Pacific teachers, because they sort of really framed their lives. They didn't sort of lead their sort of lives as they went into the classroom or the educational setting. They were surrounded by the Pacific values. So values such as respect, reciprocal relationships, family and belonging were all key. And we drew on the 9 values from Tapasa, the compass, and really explored how, sort of the range of Pacific responses to how they were sort of implemented out in the field. So I think that was something that we really wanted to make sure that we were sort of surrounded by those values in our approaches, and I've been very cognizant of that with working with our Pacific language nests going as we've been working through the research. Another model, I know that we've looked at Fale Tele, but one that really resonated with us too was the Whausinga o le Fale Tele by Pauline Lawford Simpson. And it really, because it was entrenched with the values, so we had Tautua, Alofa and Whāalo, which are the 3 pairs or the sort of po that sort of really hold up the Fale. And I spoke to Pauline probably about a month ago now about how she felt about us using her model and how we might adapt it according to the different findings that we find around, some of those values that sit around the Fale at the moment. And she was fine with that. She felt it was really good that we could use it. And it was a model that resonated because it was early childhood based. Pauline's area is early childhood Pacific education, and it just made a lot of connections to the approaches that we were taking. One of the comments that she had, and I really took this on board, was, how we found using a Samoan model in terms of learning our Samoan culture. And I think that was a really important point to make, that we're actually looking at a lot of diversity of Pacific. But when we're selecting such models like Fale Tele and Fale Tele, just to be aware that they are they emerge from a cultural context. And in light of that, we're very lucky to have our Amata, and we'll talk about, I'll sort of move into this shortly, our Samoan experts within the field, and really pulling on them to make sure that when we're using such models like Fale Tele, that we are keeping within that Samoan sort of framework when we look at how we use it. So within the language nests, we are using talanoa, and we use a very loose form of talanoa. As we know, talanoa can be used in a one-to-one context, it can be used in a large group of people, it can go for a long time, and we can have Zoom hui that can also be talanoa as well. So we're just aware of how we work with our settings in very flexible ways that are going to work with them around the talanoa process. So furthermore, the notion of tule wā is something that has been really considerable learning for us in terms of how this project is proceeding. So the notion of time and space in terms of relational building is certainly there, but it's also about how we use time and the fluidity that sort of occurs over that notion of time. And I sort of keep thinking of the term island time, but I think what we've been looking at is how we have shifted our expectations and have used those notions of le wā in a more fluid space, and how the community, how we work with the community in those spaces as well, when community events take precedent over things like our research. And being aware that a language nest kaupapa is to ensure that tamariki learn the specific practices in the culture. I know we talk about oral language development, but they also need to learn the nuances of the cultural customs and that also impact on their learning, and so they're immersed in those culturally connected contexts. So I'll get you to put onto the next slide. Thank you. So we have several ways of collecting our data, and this reflects, I guess, the diversity of the settings that we're working with, and really wanting to maintain a cultural perspective for some of our communities. So we're looking at talanoa, and also bringing in the term hui paanga, which is what we use in the Cooks, which is very close to the New Zealand Māori hui. So a talanoa will be used with our teachers from Te Punanga reo, and EFKS, our Amata. And we're using those already, and we're selecting parents and focus children from both settings. The second approach we're using is the focus group interviews, which we're using with our kindergarten teachers at Waiwhetu and Moera kindergarten. And this is working really well. This works, they're familiar with this approach, and they've sort of taken this on board quite readily. So the third technique is teaching team inquiries. And so within 2-3 cycles of teacher inquiries, teachers look into the oral language interactions and practice supported by us, the research team. So there's a lot of learning and discovery in that space. We look at teacher practice and observations, so we observe what teachers are doing, and they're developing those project-specific teacher practice observation tools. Looking at video recorded observations and video simulated recall within our kindergartens. Maybe we take that into our language nest. We're still working out what will work best for them, and a lot of consultation happening around the talanoa. Where teachers use the tools to look at oral language pedagogy and reflect on their video recorded episodes. That's a video, sorry. The video observations are used for learning as well. The document analysis, looking at analysing the assessment documentation, such as the learning stories that they may be gathering over this time. For the focus children between March and 2024 and March 2025. And also the reflective meeting notes that we take as part of that research inquiry. So we're gathering notes as well as we go through and from the conversations and the talanoa that are being held. So next slide, thanks, Sue. Okay, so each setting reflected on what they wanted to look at over this time, and so they each developed an overarching inquiry focus. So Te Punanga Reo, fortunately, at the end of last year, or over 2023, they've been working with the Ministry of Education to develop a Cook Islands language app. And so it made a lot of sense to then use this particular app in developing children's oral language. So their overarching question or inquiry was, in what ways does Moera enhance oral language skills and cultural understanding among tamariki? So Moera is the name of the tool that they've developed. EFKS, our Amata, when they reflected on language, they could see that language was being imparted very strongly at mat times, and times when they'd do the lotu and they'd do maybe pese and sort of really immerse children in language in that part of the day. But they wanted to explore perhaps a longer, sort of bring a longer sort of gaze into this and to consider where else they would be using language and developing language, such as at story time, indoor, outdoor. So thinking about how it's delivered across the whole program. Moera kindergarten, their inquiry focus is really how to build their kaiako confidence. And they really were starting from the beginning, and Sue will speak to this a little bit more, and increase the use of Pacific language of the children on the tamariki who are represented within the kindergarten learning environment. And there has been quite a lot of learning for them in this process. And Waiwhetu kindergarten are looking at how they can strengthen the cultural backgrounds of the Pacific children in their settings who are reflected in their kindergarten program. So, yeah, really interesting, well-considered inquiries that will unpack a lot, and it's been really valuable to sort of be working alongside them. So I think I've got the next one. So, yes. Okay, so I'm just expanding a little bit on that inquiry for Te Punanga or Te Reo Kuki Airani. As we said, the focus was enhancing language development through cultural connectivity, and how the use of our Moera, our Cook Islands language app, can support language development and cultural understanding among tamariki at Te Punanga. So a key aim that sort of also comes from this is to how to explore the integration of technology and cultural resources to enhance children's oral language development. So as I said, at the end of 2023, Te Punanga Reo, with some funding from the Ministry of Education, developed the language app, and it was designed to be used by the teachers with children, with parents, and by parents, and with the wider community. So they're looking at how to use the technology delivered by this app, which already seems to be well received by parents who are using it, and with other cultural resources and activities such as dance, oral presentation, singing. So it's not sitting outside the program, it's how they're using within the developed program as well. They're seeking to see in what ways they can weave the language learning into all aspects of the curriculum and program, and to observe how this is fostering oral language development, in particular Cook Islands language, being aware that this is a Cook Island language nest, but also that they have a bilingual focus and they have communities that are very multicultural. So it's made up of many different cultures within this setting. So that is really what they're looking at in terms of their approach to the research. And the next one, Sue, is EFKS, which is Ecclesia Potoanga Christiano Samoa. So it's the Congregational Church, Christian Church of Samoa, and it's actually built. It's a beautiful fale that's built right beside the church. I don't know if anyone's been to Newtown, but it's beautiful architecturally designed fale, really lovely. So their approach is capturing, enhancing Tamaiti's oral language use and development and their cultural understandings at met time and during daily play episodes. So it's really looking at how they actively support oral language development in the daily routine, such as met time, and also capturing those examples and being a little bit more intentional, I guess, about looking at episodes within the play context and at other times of the day, both indoors and outdoors. So noting that this does require a high level of Samoan fluency language, and I'll talk about this in one of our challenges coming up, particularly for the in-the-moment spontaneous episodes. If children are speaking Samoan, we need teachers who are there right beside them. And this is what we're wanting to sort of, in terms of their oral language development, is actually understanding that we need highly skilled teachers in this space. Looking at teachers that are seeking to go beyond observing and facilitating language conversations. They're looking at, really being really intentional in terms of what they see and how they pick up these conversations. So yes, I'll hand back to Sue to speak to Moera and Waiwhetu.
So both the Moera and the Waiwhetu kindergarten teaching teams are what I'd see as being fairly typical of New Zealand early childhood teaching teams. You could probably lift them out of their centres and put them into hundreds of others around the country, and they would look very, very similar. They're all women. They come from across the two teams a number of different cultural backgrounds, but none are Pacific early childhood teachers, and they're predominantly Palangi. And their kindergartens serve very, very diverse, multicultural and linguistically diverse communities. And both of them have children who are enrolled who collectively represent quite a number of different Pacific heritages. Some children are whakapapa to more than one Pacific heritage there. So, as we said before, Moera Kindergarten is focused very much around building kaioko confidence and increasing the use of Pacific languages. And so, in their first inquiry cycle, they've begun really with continuing an existing approach of celebrating Pacific Language Weeks as they occur. It's something that the Kindergarten Association expects of all their kindergartens. But I think what has emerged for them as they have been doing this, and as we've been working with them, is they've become very conscious that the learning and the practices that they have been developing and using to support and celebrate each of those language weeks are not yet embedded across their programs in an ongoing kind of a way. And so they've been working, and we've been supporting them to really build knowledge about some of the available resources that are there for them to draw on. And they've been thinking about how can we use the model and the approaches that we've used to incorporate and embed Te Ao Māori into their program. Can we kind of use that as a way of thinking about how we can also strengthen the inclusion of Pacific cultures and languages into their programs. So, for example, thinking about their karakia and their kai karakia, can we adopt and weave and incorporate different karakia and loto that reflect different Pacific heritage and reflect the children's heritages there, as just a very simple example. What already they've found happening has been much stronger and increased conversations with children about their cultural identities. That is part of connecting with the different language weeks, and they're talking about where these different languages come from, where in the Pacific they come from, and they're helping children to develop that understanding of the Pacific as representing multiple different cultures and languages, children have been engaging in a lot of conversations with them about their own identities and where they're from. And teachers, I think, are much more attuned to that as they've been doing that. They've also had increased conversations with their parents and whānau about their aspirations for their children. And there's been really strong enthusiasm from whānau for the project and for teachers to be able to incorporate more Pacific languages into their program. So we made the invitation for whānau to come to the kindergarten to meet with the researchers to find out more about the project, and they were very, very positive about that. And actually, one of the things that we want to do more of in future is to have many more regular talanoa with families, so that we are not just doing the beginning, middle, and end as we'd originally envisaged doing there. The very fact of having to talk to their parents about the project to gain parental consent for their children to be involved has created opportunities for conversations with the teachers and whānau, and has led the teachers to be more, I think, a little more confident in asking whānau for support with various aspects. And as an example, after they asked their tokolau parents for some advice on language structures, the parents then gifted them a tokolau dictionary for them to use in an ongoing way. So these are just a couple of the very small initial sort of ideas that are, examples that are coming through. Waiwhetu has focused very much on how the cultural backgrounds of their Pacific children can be more reflected in their kindergarten program. And the teachers in this team were very keen not to be tokenistic in their work. They were very aware that to become really skilled in both their cultural knowledge and their linguistic knowledge across the variety of languages and cultures represented in their kindergarten was a complex and challenging ask. And they wanted to make sure that whatever they did was going to be something that was going to work well and wasn't going to be tokenistic. So they've started very intentionally with a very specific focus on their environment and on their documentation, so that really starting by doing some analyses and auditing of both their documentation and their environment to think about what is currently in there and how can they build on that in ways that are not tokenistic. So not just sort of putting something on the wall and saying, oh, we've done it, but really thinking about how they can really draw on and reflect cultures through the equipment, through the materials, as well as through the artifacts that are included in their kindergarten. They've also found the talanoa with families really, really valuable, and one very exciting episode for them was when we had the first talanoa session, and a parent was off a little bit to the side listening in on the discussion, and then at the end just very quietly revealed to the teachers and to Ali that their child was of Cook Island Tahitian descent, and it was something that the parent hadn't revealed previously to the teachers. So as a little illustration about how just the mere fact of teachers starting to open up conversations with parents, it starts to bring real opportunities for discussion, opportunities for parents to feel, oh, these teachers are valuing my language and my culture, and wanting to really support my child. Perhaps this parent then felt a little more secure and a little bit safer about how she was about sharing some of her knowledge and her background with the teachers. I'm going to pass back to Ellie now.
Thanks, Sue. And just to follow up on that last comment, it was actually quite interesting because I think it's actually helped to dismantle the teachers' assumptions a little bit about, that Pacific community, families are like this, but we are very diverse. And with this family, I think that was quite fair. You wouldn't have taken her to be Cook Island Tahitian, but very much whakapapaed back. And I think that's something that is coming through, that people even though if they're first or second or third generation New Zealand born, they still have that strong akapapa back to their communities, and often several sort of Pacific nations. So Punanga Reo, they're making a start. They're using the app purposefully, and in some ways it's actually worked out quite well time-wise, because they can then connect to and almost feed back to the ministry that this is a way that they're using their app too as part of this research. And it's being used. So the teachers, particularly the younger ones in the team, have found using the app to support conversations is really progressing well. Children are becoming familiar with the technology, and interestingly, parents are receptive to using the app to enhance their own language development. And that's a key thing that is important in the Cooks, is that most young parents don't speak their own reo. And so when they can use something like this, they can start learning alongside their children in a way that works for them. Using an app is something that sort of they sort of connect to it readily. So as I say, the teachers are using the app. It's being used to support parents learning, as many have not had the benefit of learning reo Kuki Airani. Much of the language is conveyed during that time when tamariki present their mihi. They sing along to pure songs and imani and cultural dance. So it's connecting to authentic learning, authentic cultural sort of practice. The setting is multicultural, and whilst reo Māori is the common language, teachers are also aware that many home languages are represented in this setting as well. They do have a full complement of fluent Kuki Airani reo speakers, though, which they're very proud of. I mean, it's something that they've had to work really hard at maintaining and retaining. Parents and families are supportive of their children being immersed in culture and language that may not be their home language. As I say, they have Italian, they have Samoa, and they have Papa'a children there who are all sort of learning reo Kuki Airani as well. Also, one of the aspects that has come through is that strong leadership at the top, and the supportive approach from the manager of the setting really determines how this research will play out. So she oversees the process, and we build a sense of trust in their role as the conduit, the research sort of like, not go-between, but they're a very strong research partner. And then we allow that to sort of then work across the team. And so rather than sort of meeting with the team as we have, we meet with the manager, and then we have a talanoa, discuss how it goes before we proceed into that team approach at the Punanga Reo. So that's part of some of the things that are coming through from the research at the minute. And Sue, if you'd like to turn it over to EFKS. Thank you. And so our research journey is just beginning. I guess we haven't sort of like had the same momentum with EFKS. They've had some things that have happened, which I'll talk about in terms of the challenges. But once again, they have a manager who is very supportive and leads the team in that decision-making space. So once again, we trust their roles who are able to broach and oversee the process in these beginning stages. And this may take some time. So we note that within the setting that Samoan language is conveyed in a planned, intentional way at structured mat time. So this is the way that children learn, that when they sit at the mat, there will be some things that they will learn to help them to learn for us Samoa, the Samoan way. And this is an important aspect of the language nest. And children learning those cultural ways of being and doing alongside the language. And I always say that you're on the right track, so that when they go back to their village in Savaii, they know exactly who they are, and they can stand up and represent their families, their ainga, proudly. So there's a lot of oral language development and reciting verses for White Sunday. And so there are things that are happening already that we can capture in terms of children's oral language development. Teachers are focusing further on the play episodes, understanding that, language happens across the whole day and other contexts. So picking up on those language opportunities. And in this way, they can assist children to build a repertoire of kupu and phrases in Samoan language in a range of meaningful contexts. But as I noted earlier on in a previous slide, that we need fluent Samoan speakers who can then pick up if this is, and respond to those conversations. So that's where EFKS are at this point, and we'll move on to the next slide. I'm just aware of the time. So there have been challenges for us, probably more so in our language nest, and well, not so much challenges, though, really just getting our head around how time works in different ways. And so we've sort of taken a while to sort of like move into the space of actually actively researching. Our Samoan community, our teachers have lots of responsibilities out in the community. So they're at a language nest, but they also have roles in the church. They have community sort of responsibilities. And so this is just another thing that they, that we're asking of them as part of their very rich, full lives as Samoan community members. So what we did, there was a bit of a setback, a huge setback to be fair, when the teacher who had gone to a church conference in Samoa, a really valued member of EFKS, our Amata community, passed away. And that certainly we left things. We needed to leave things for several weeks. It was not appropriate to go in and sort of rush and okay, well, now you've got the funeral out of the way, so we've let it lie and we've let it lie, and they've come back to us when they have been ready. And that is how it has to be, using this time and the space in that relational way. A challenge that really have encountered in EFKS is the lack of fluent Samoan teachers in the current teaching team. I noted when I was doing a TLRI research project with this team back in 2017, we've lost 4 of those fluent Samoan teachers and they haven't been able to be replaced. So this is a dire situation for us. We have 2 teachers who are fluent Samoan speakers at the moment, and you can imagine the pressures that are being placed on them. So we really have to give them the space to really just to see how this is going to work for them. Once again, our language nest is a very multicultural setting with tamaiti and ainga from a range of nations. And when we talk about bilingual, sometimes English is becoming the default language of use. And so there are some debates around oral language and which language are we actually working with. So I think that will become a bit clearer as we go through. Some of us feel it may be English. I would love to be promoting our Pacific languages, so we really have to sort of see what comes from the data and from the research as we go through. As I've noted before, timeframes can be difficult for meetings, therefore flexibility. We need to be flexible working with the team. The notion of levar, the time and the space keeps coming back, and it's really important that we hold on to that. That it's not determined by the clock, that we actually bring a more sort of fluid, flexible sort of island time approach into this. Our older teaching team, we have our head teacher is 78, believe it or not, really sprightly and wonderful, and she'll, very, very healthy, but we can't rely on our older teachers to be, there's no one coming through to replace them. So that's a huge challenge for our Samoan community here in Newtown. And the IELTS process is prohibitive for young Samoan teachers to come through. And according to one of our teachers there doesn't seem to be the desire. So I'll just quickly whip through to the next one, because I'm just aware that, the challenges encountered by Punanga. Once again, community events. We have the 200-year commemoration of Christianity in Mangaia, which is one of the southern islands in the Cooks. Mama Pure is a deacon of the church and needed to go to this, so she was away for several weeks. We adjusted our time frame because she wasn't around. She's one of our mentors here. There's time to meet during the day because these guys are really stretched when you've only got so many teachers, and so I guess it's the story of early childhood, but acutely so when you've got our language teachers are the main resource. So staffing is not easily replaced, and we have a lot of competition from other services who can offer far better conditions. So they get snapped up the moment they graduate. The Kindergarten Association can offer them far better conditions, better play. And so our language nests are losing out. And it's really heartbreaking to see, because these teachers may have been with Punanga for a while, and as soon as they finish their qualification, they get a call from kindergarten, can you come and work with us? Yeah, and why wouldn't you when you've got bills to pay, mortgages and groceries to buy? Also, a huge challenge for us is that less than 5% of us speak our home language. So that's a journey that we're taking in as well. So some of the challenges is very quickly whipping through, and I'll now hand over to Sue to talk about.
Kia ora, Ellie. So that we've kind of covered the two kindergartens here in this one slide, because they have encountered fairly similar challenges. And I think probably the biggest one has been, and the teachers have been very open about this, is really acknowledging what they have brought to the project in terms of their prior knowledge and their prior experiences. And so, they have acknowledged that they're beginning from that position of not having a great deal of knowledge about either the cultures or the languages of the Pacific children attending their kindergartens. Added to that, as Ali referred to in her earlier conversation, many of the parents of the children are using English as their first and main language at home, and it's often the grandparents who are the primary users of Pacific languages within the families. And so there's at times while parents are often really keen for their children to be using more of their home language at the kindergarten, there's not necessarily always the ability to be able to pass on examples of words or phrases to teachers. So teachers are needing to also connect with grandparents often in that space. Another challenge really has been the limited existing resources within the kindergartens to support them to strengthen their practices. And so quite a chunk of the work that we've been doing has been supporting teachers and unpacking what is available beyond their kindergarten, what resources are there, both within their communities, but also perhaps online resources. So, in addition to the Cook Island language app that Ali was talking about, there are several other language apps that we've managed to hook teachers into, so that they've got not only examples of sentence structures, but also of pronunciation, which they're all very conscious of. They don't want to butcher the language by not pronouncing things well. So, and I think probably the really big one is that keeping the project manageable and for teachers to feel that it's doable, that it's not overwhelming, because they have, as all teachers and all early childhood services have, they have lots and lots of other demands on them, other expectations from their employers, from the ministry. And so it's just about helping and supporting teachers to say, yep, this next step is going to be fine. And then the next step after that is going to be fine. And we've been really clear that our expectations are not that they reach really high levels of fluency in all of these different languages over the next 15 months of the project, because that's completely unrealistic. But how can we support them to keep taking, step by step along this journey? So we're going to just 2 slides through the two to wrap up with. I'm conscious that time's going, so we'll whiz through these fairly quickly. Ali. Sorry, Ali, you need to come back. You're on mute.
Sorry, I had a bit of a cough, so I had to mute myself too. Yes, I'll try not to take too much time, but I think in some ways, when we think of early childhood, there have been some things that have occurred historically that may have impacted quite adversely on early childhood teachers' ability to work in the Pacific space. And the first one that comes to mind is actually the removal of all of the Pacific content from the final draft of Te Whāriki back in 1986. Now, before that, there'd been a lot of consultation with the communities, and you probably know Jan Toma, who's from up your way, who actually, really were really quite bemused when that content was cut out. And I do think that was a disservice to our teachers, because there was a lot of really useful sort of strategies and ways of working with Pacific communities that could have been really helpful. So, you know, also we look at the funding structures. At a certain point, Pacific languages moved into full-day education and care, sort of that was their, their status. So they had to actually meet the requirements, and it was never the intention of the Pacific Language Nest, I would suggest, to be a full-day education and care setting. You know, consequently, they've moved from a playgroup when we had like community members coming in and dropping in and sort of spending some time, like the mamas would come in and do some weaving and spend time with the things like police vetting and, you know, that whole sort of all of the legislation documentation that's sort of come in, the regulations, it has prohibited the language nest from really proceeding in the way that I would suggest it should. Also, we've talked about retaining Pacific staff, but also training Pacific teachers. We're not just not getting them through. We really have, given that our Pacific communities are one of the fastest growing and we're very young, we need, you know, Pacific teachers out there in the field. So it's looking at the complexity of the Pacific cultural world. And one of the comments that the teachers from Waiwhetu, I think it was, said that every week there's a Pacific language week, and so we're having to turn our head to this, and then next week it's another language, and they were getting a little bit flustered about how much they had to, you know. So it's actually looking at embracing diversity and understanding that, you know, it's actually okay to sort of use the knowledge that you have and to build on that in that space. And yeah, so also the cultural makeup, as we suggest, very monolingual, monocultural, and that makes it quite tricky for teachers generally. And yeah, looking at the linguistic knowledge of teachers, certainly it's something that we need to be building on. Yeah, so lots of work to do in terms of the wider picture, but hopefully this research will provide some responses to how we might move further. So I'll hand back to Sue.
Good, thank you, Ellie. So just very quickly to wrap up, so some of the next steps for us are adapting some of the tools that we had initially developed and which we've used with the kindergartens, adapting them so they're more fit for purpose, if you like, more culturally relevant and appropriate for our Pacific immersion services. As I said before, we really want to expand our use of talanoa with both the Pacific immersion service teachers, but also with the ainga and the whānau and across all 4 centres, because we think that's going to be a very exciting opportunity to draw and strengthen those connections between kaiakoa and aianga and whānau in the space within this research. And the last thing that we're working on is we had initially thought about developing a project observation tool and starting to use it quite early. And we've kind of shifted our thinking around that what we want to do is to spend some time actually co-constructing, if you like, co-developing that with our 4 centres. It will look different for the 2 different contexts. And we think that's absolutely fine, because, you know, teachers and centres are going to be in different spaces and in different places along the continuum, that we will be able to start trialling and using with them in 2025, with a view that this might be one of the tangible outputs that comes out of this particular project. So we have, apologies, we've got a little bit over time, but we'll just finish with our reference slide and back to Maria. Kia ora.
Oh, amazing. I was just totally immersed in your presentation, and thank you so much for sharing those insights with us, both the learnings that have occurred for you, but also what you're generating in the project with your Pacific communities. And it's such an important focus in these early years of children's lives, given the link between being strong in culture and language, and what that does for promoting holistic outcomes for children, for their families and their communities. So thank you for the work you're doing. So we have a question in the Q&A box, which is great. I have got a backup question if we don't have others beyond that one. But the first question is from Helen, and this is, in terms of all the many language weeks, what are your thoughts on focusing more on the ones where you have tamariki of that culture? And the point being, it does get confusing for everyone having 10 different words for the example, for example, the colour yellow. How can we support this learning of all these languages, and I guess in a manageable, purposeful way?
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good strategy, and particularly from listening to the kindergarten teachers who are really getting a little bit sort of, in some ways, focusing on the families and the children that you have currently in your setting, and getting a sense of confidence around using those words, I think, and like the greetings and having the conversations. But then again, I mean, it's really tricky, because having a language week each week indicates that we are there's a lot of diversity around the Pacific as well. So yeah, a lot will come from where the teaching teams are, whether they're starting from a really beginning point or whether they have some wider knowledge and have sort of, so it's a really tricky one. But I would say if they are just starting out, maybe that could be a good place to start, and consult with their parents and whānau as well. What would they like to see? One of the things that often in Pacific communities, there's a lot of intermarriage across. I mean, I'm Tahitian, Cook Island. Many of us whakapapa back, across to different nations as well. So that's the complexity that comes through. But it shouldn't deter teachers. I think really what I like to see is the interest and the passion to want to know, and not to be coerced into doing this stuff. Because often if there's a coercion or being told by the senior teacher that you're going to do it, there's less likely to be more of a buy-in. But if they're wanting to do, if they're wanting to find out, then, that thirst will sort of hopefully maintain that momentum. So what do you think? Have you got any?
Yeah, I agree. And I think in the two kindergartens, they were just focusing on the ones that were responding to the children that they had in their kindergartens. I think one of the challenges that they had was that there is a period in the year where you get week after week after week in quite quick progress, successions. So for them, and it's something that they and us can do nothing about. But if they had more time between each one, so that they were able to spend 2 or 3 weeks actually really starting to embed some of the phrases and the words that they were using to keep practicing some of the songs that they had been drawing on, then they felt they may become more deeply and permanently embedded in their programs. So it's just gosh, this week it's this language week, and next week it's another one, and then 2 weeks and it's another one. I think they were finding that part was a challenge of the recent months.
Yeah, great. So in this project, I'm learning that it's about drawing on different knowledge systems, so Pacific knowledge systems and Western knowledge systems, and you're also, I understand, grappling with what it means to be a researcher in this space. When our Pacific communities migrated to Aotearoa, New Zealand was asking the same of them, to really navigate different knowledge systems. How has that been for you in this project, and what's perhaps been your biggest learning in relation to navigating both Western and Pacific knowledge systems in your project?
Yeah, well, I think we had quite an in-depth discussion a few weeks ago about how we were finding things, and it was a little bit of an uncomfortable space in some ways, where we had actually set up with quite a Western framework, although we'd had some of the theoretical models that underpin, like Fale Tele and Fale Tele. There still was a little bit of a sense of maybe not disconnect, but how this was going to work, and so we're still like figuring things out. But I think we became becoming more familiar with, and as you say, that's what our when they came to New Zealand, had to figure out how this place worked. well, it's sort of, in some ways, it's almost like a reverse where our papa our researchers are having to sort of figure out other ways. And I think that will also then impact on the teachers out in the case study settings, that they can take on another way, a sort of a cultural lens that will enhance their teaching. I think they're starting to come to that realization that this is actually going to make them stronger teachers by learning some of these other ways. And yeah, so it is a journey. And, you know, sometimes there's a bit of give and take, because we're working with two very, you know, the knowledge systems of our language nest and our mainstream kindergartens. Sometimes, you know, there's a bit of disconnect. And it just occurred to me, actually, when we were thinking about the where to next, is maybe we need to have some talanoa for all together, so that there's some learning across, because often we're very siloed, and that might be a way of actually maybe making sharing some of the messages and valuing and honouring some of the wonderful Pacific cultural sort of ways of living our lives that can make, you know, are really useful to know, because our kindergarten teachers, they were starting from a really beginning point. And so, you know, their learning trajectory is like this. We're starting at a different point, but also it's, yeah. So I think, yeah, it's really quite an interesting sort of place to be, and where to next will also, you know, evolve. And it may be that we ask our teachers, it maybe we sort of like then go back to them and say, you know, how you find, what more do you need to know to do, you know, would you like there to be more of a connection? So yeah, taking time for conversation is always good.
I think the other part about it is that within our team we are quite diverse, and in terms of the knowledges and the experiences that we bring. So you know, we're incredibly fortunate with Ali and Melly in terms of the deep knowledges that and the research that they've done as well. Whereas people like myself and our other colleagues have come more into the work from the inquiry space, from the development of a range of different tools to help teachers focus on their practice. And so, just as Ali was saying, you know, the kindergarten teachers are at a more, you know, at the beginning of their journey in many ways. I think probably some of our colleagues, including myself, are much more at the beginning of our journey as well. So it's a, you know, it's a learning journey for all of us, not just about what we're finding out through the research, but about how to do this piece of research and culturally and appropriate ways, and in ways that do enable both worldviews to be drawn on. So it's a very humbling experience. Yeah.
It is, isn't it? Wonderful. Thank you both so much. I'll just, Nalini is saying that, you know, we should have the passion to learn and practice, and I think that's an excellent starting point for really exploring this area. So I'll pass over to Justine now. Thank you both, and she will do our closing karakia.
Kia ora, Moera, and ngā mihi nui kia kōrua, Ellie and Sue, for your presentation. The early insights from your research data are sure to be really useful for our Early Childhood Seminar Series community, and we are looking forward very much to hearing more from you when your study is completed. And I can see already people are starting to think about how they're going to apply what they've been hearing tonight in their own practice. So anō, ngā mihi nui kia kōrua, Ellie and Sue. To our Early Childhood Seminar Series audience, if you wish to share or revisit this presentation, please do check out our Early Childhood Seminar Series YouTube channel. The recording of the seminar will be available in a couple of days. And we look forward to seeing you again in December for our final online seminar for 2024. Our presenter will be Dr. Hazel Woodhouse from the University of Waikato. So keep an eye on your inbox for the flyer and registration information. Thank you again for joining us today. We're going to close with karakia. Me noi tātou. Kia tau te rangi Māori o te rangi I tū iho nei, o papatuanuku I tākoto nei, o te tai ao I awhi nei, ki runga I a tātou, tihei mauri ora. May the peace of the sky above, of the earth below, of the all-embracing universe rest upon us all. Behold, it is life. Take good care, everyone. Ka kite anō.